Late night World War III update. This is going to be a quick one. Here's what I know. Okay, so diplomatic relations between Russia and the United States have reached an impasse. Just today, Sergei Ryabkov, Russia's deputy foreign minister, stated that they're getting ready to scale back diplomatic missions inside Western countries. What does that mean? Well, on any other day, that would just be standard fare, run up the escalation ladder that we've become accustomed to over the last 2 years. However, this has now happened just 24 hours after Lloyd Austin had an emergency phone call with his Russian counterpart, the new Minister of Defense there, Andrei Belousov. Now, you only have these types of phone calls during incredibly tense and emergent situations. The last time they had one of these phone calls was in March of 2023, and I believe at that time, what was happening, the Russians and the Americans have both ostensibly backed out of the New START treaty, which of course limits the amount of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons communications. The Russians had given or had initiated the process of giving Belarus nuclear weapons. There was a shoot down of a drone, or not a shoot down, but a bring down of a drone in the Black Sea. Prior to that was in the nuclear dirty bomb scare of October of 2022, I believe, when Sergei Shoigu, who was Minister of Defense at the time, contacted his NATO counterparts and advised them that Ukraine was getting ready to use a nuclear dirty bomb in an attempt to provoke a Russian response, which would, of course, bring NATO into the conflict. Fortunately, none of that happened, and that was just the Russian allegation. I should add, I'm not saying that that was matter of fact. Now, fast forward to today. In the last week, you have the civilian bombing of Sevastopol, in which Russia alleges that the Ukrainians used American ATACMS cluster munitions on civilians on a beach in Sevastopol, Crimea, of course guided by American guidance systems and drones and possibly engineers, as well as green lighting attacks deep into Moscow, bombing of strategic nuclear radars inside of Russia, Russia's tactical nuclear drills, and a whole host of other escalatory incidents. Now, because all of this is going on, this ostensibly means that we are approaching a state of DEFCON 2, because if you are about to suspend diplomatic missions at a time when you just had an emergency phone call with the heads of the military, the top of the hop, okay, that only happens during very critical times of this conflict. And the fact that just a day after that, you're talking about pulling out your ambassadors, that's big news. We also have a mysterious flight from Moscow to New York City. It could just be UN related, as it usually is, and there's a 90% chance it is that. But at this point in time, we just don't know, because we don't know the extent of this shadow war that is going on. So I'm guessing that right now we're about to cross a new Rubicon of DEFCON and reach a new level of nuclear readiness, which of course puts us at much higher risk of nuclear accidents happening. So that is what's happening on the Russian front. Now, there have been some false claims today that North Korea is about to send 100,000 troops to Ukraine to fight. I'm not saying that that couldn't happen, and I'm not saying that's not already happening under the guise of mercenaries and private contractors, but it's far more likely for practical purposes that North Korea's assistance to Russia in this respect is going to be mostly industrial, which is not to say that they might not send some officials there in order to train for their potential conflict with South Korea and the United States, which is ramping up every single day, I should add. But in terms of practicality, the interoperability between the North Koreans, just the language barrier, and that they're using different weapon systems. Yeah, the North Koreans have experience with Soviet-era equipment, but a lot of things have changed. So I cannot see North Korea being integrated into that front unless things were really, really bad. Now, they do have that new strategic partnership, which dictates that if one of them is attacked, the other will come to their aid. And today, it's been stated by the North Koreans that they have now tested multiple re-entry vehicles for their nuclear warheads, meaning that they now not only have the ICBMs that can be delivered to the United States, but they're now going to have multiple warheads. And they already have 90 nuclear weapons, and, they're getting more at a rapid pace, which means that they're effectively a nuclear power, okay? So this is bad. This is very, very bad. There is no good news today whatsoever. In fact, on the Lebanese front, there's new video footage that has been confirmed. There's a lot of false footage that suggests that, and I want to conclude that North Korean piece before I forget. There is no official source that I can find that indicates that North Korea is about to send 100,000 troops. Now, they did say, Kim Jong-un did offer this a year ago, but that's what people are referencing, okay? So this is, we can make valid inferences that indeed it's very likely that North Korea will assist Russia in any way that they can, but there is no explicit statements about sending troops at this point in time anyways, which is not to say it can't happen. Anything can happen at this point. Now, in terms of what is happening on the Lebanese front, there is new video of Israel amassing forces in the northern part of their country, getting ready to do an offensive. The question is, why are they waiting so long, and why all this buildup? I talked about it yesterday. I would encourage you to go and watch that video to get a little bit of context for this one. But it appears as though they're waiting for numerous things. I don't think they want to do anything before the presidential debate that's about to happen, that is being heavily censored by CNN. Social media influencers can't even cover this bullshit dog and pony show. If there ever was one, that was it. It's all smoke and mirrors. I mean, it's not even worth watching, to be brutally. It's purely entertainment at this point, okay? Your choice is between dementia, narcissism, and steroids with the RFK guy. Now, the reason why I think they're stalling is because they're waiting for the American warships to get there for reinforcements. They want to make sure that they have all their provisions in place beforehand, because they know it's going to be very difficult to get this stuff once they enter into this conflict. And when they do, it's going to be an intractable, untenable state of affairs, because all hell could just potentially break loose throughout the Middle East. All they have to do is invoke some sort of theocratic call to arms, and that's it. You're going to have hundreds of thousands of guys who've been waiting for this moment to become martyrs, to throw themselves up into the meat grinder and attack Israel asymmetrically. And Israel is not prepared, and I think they know they aren't prepared. If their air force is compromised in any way whatsoever, and there are rumors that the Russians have now provided Hezbollah and that Iranian axis, and that Iran has provided Hezbollah with some new sophisticated air defense systems. So if, their ace of spades cannot succeed, and if there's any chink in that part of their armor, Israel's going to be very screwed, even if the Americans come to their aid. I've talked in depth about this yesterday. I would encourage you to go watch that video. According to what's going on the Lebanese front, I have a friend who's from the Middle East who has a lot of connections there. And he states that the Lebanese, even though they don't have an official civil defense plan, because right now, if you look on Lebanese media, they're being very quiet about this conflict. Like, they're not calling attention to it, which is exactly what you would expect any country to do who is on the brink of being invaded. You don't want to spook your population. You don't want them getting in the way. You don't want a panicked population interfering with military maneuvers that you're going to need to defend the country. This is exactly what happened in Ukraine. This is why they downplayed the whole idea. Then they locked everybody down. They threw away the keys and they said, now you can't leave. Okay, so Lebanon, however, they have a culture of preparedness, apparently. More so than I knew. Not quite honey badger level, that's the Houthis, in that, these guys just live and breathe warfare. But they have a culture of preparedness in the sense that every household, or at least the ones who are most proximate to the front lines, have an emergency supply of food that can last them months, if not years. They have a familiarity with all kinds of firearms, and not just machine guns or things like that, but we're talking about, you know, actual heavy equipment, you know, bazookas, missile launchers, things like that, right? So they're a more prepared population who are ready for this sort of thing. So perhaps the Israelis are underestimating that angle of things. Perhaps they don't care because, of course, one man just does not want to go to jail. I think it might have something to do with not wanting to call any attention to it before this election. But I'm sure that there's a lot of other things in play in terms of why they're not ready to go yet, but they are certainly amassing forces. Now, of course, the Americans finally have called their citizens back, not called their citizens back, because they haven't issued a travel level 4 travel advisory yet. Sorry guys, it's getting really late. But they have stated that you should be prepared to evacuate as soon as possible. Now, Germany, Canada, numerous European countries, Middle Eastern countries, including Kuwait, have advised their population to get out because war is essentially imminent. America has not done that yet. I presume it's because they don't want, I think it's because they know that as soon as they enact that level 4 travel advisory, that's when people are going to start to be very concerned, and then that might actually be a catalyst for the war starting before they want it to. Of course, they want the initiative, so they don't want Hezbollah to go on the initiative, and Hezbollah probably knows that if the United States starts calling its citizens home, then it's only a matter of hours, if not days, if not hours, before shit goes down. So they don't want to potentially give them license to attack earlier. Now, Israel has been crying about weapons deliveries, but I recently discovered that they've received $6.5 billion worth of weapons since October 7th. $6.5 billion, not counting all of the air support and all the other contributions that are off the books. Just having strike carrier groups in that region must cost billions of dollars. But they've been complaining that these weapon shipments have been slowing down. But then you come to learn that half of this $6.5 billion has come in the month of May. Okay? So where is the supposed bottleneck that Netanyahu is crying about? So it starts to look like this whole thing about they're not getting enough weapons, or they're not getting the weapons that they need, is all just bullshit. And in fact, they're getting more weapons faster than they ever have before. Now, they've also revived a new working group. Now, this working group was reestablished because they're concerned about Iranian nuclear weapons. That's the big play here. That's the one that's coming. They're starting to check off all the boxes. This group was disbanded a few years ago, I believe. Not disbanded, but it was frozen for nearly 2 years. And it comes as both the United States and Israeli officials are concerned that Iran may attempt to advance its nuclear weapons technology, get this, in the weeks leading up to the U.S. presidential election in November. In the weeks. And the reason that they would do this is because I'm presuming that they think that if Trump gets elected, they only have a certain period of time when the lame duck is in office, that they of course can have that nuclear weapon that would hopefully at that point be a deterrent. We know that the United States has recently been doing military training for how to infiltrate subterranean nuclear facilities, and I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 countries that might have facilities like that. So once they open Pandora's box with a war with Hezbollah, it's going to become an intractable situation, and it'll quickly inflame the entire Middle East, and it will quickly spread to Iran, who of course is having many of its high-ranking officers targeted right now in Lebanon, in Syria. So NATO is also putting pressure on Russia about the Iranian issue. So now Russia becomes more incentivized to potentially extend their nuclear umbrella over Iran, or potentially enter into some sort of military strategic partnership as they did with North Korea, but perhaps they're more reluctant to do that. They want a war to happen in the Middle East because it's going to take attention away of what is going on their borders. However, they still have an obligation to Iran, who has assisted them with drones, and they now have this gas hub pact, so there's economic relationships there. But I think they're quickly approaching the point where they're going to make a decision. But it seems like there's multiple factions within Russia, really just two factions, one that's pro-Israel and one that isn't, and we really almost need a Venn diagram of who supports who. Okay, you have this certain type of person who supports Ukraine and Israel, this type of person who doesn't support Ukraine but supports Israel, and there's these different overlapping types of people, and these are different factions with different ideological underpinnings that I haven't quite been able to make sense of yet. But Russia is holding back, going all in on this Iranian axis, even though I think the only reason why they haven't turned on the S-400s yet in Syria to start shooting down Israeli F-35s is because they don't want to be party to that conflict. They want the conflict to happen on that front, and they want to be there to have a foothold, but they don't necessarily want to start another front and start fighting, on that front, because of course they're spread out way too thin for that at this point in time. In terms of what's going on in the East, North Korea, for the third day in a row, is sending a new volley of balloons day after day filled with garbage and human waste, I believe. Now, this is clearly provocative. Right now, you have South Korea recommencing live fire exercises, and, just all hell is breaking loose on the North Korean peninsula. And now, as they've entered this new strategic partnership with Russia, what this means really is that any conflict that happens in any one of these theaters now, when you have these alliances becoming solidified, the likelihood that it's going to spread to the rest of the world increases. So I shouldn't have to tell you at this point, it's a good time to be a prepper, right? Norway conducted some historic deployments of nuclear weaponry recently. They had surfaced a nuclear submarine off the coast of Norway. The U.S. Nuclear Command and Control did some exercises there. This, of course, on the heels of Norway claiming that they're going to be stockpiling grain, 30,000 tons. The stated goal is 90,000 tons. They have their fighter jets parked in Cold War era bunkers that are nuclear capable. They have, of course, the seed vault and all other manner of mobilizing their populations for war, in some cases doing so secretively. But no doubt that is what's happening. Now, I was going to do a dedicated video on this next story. I talked about the evacuation orders from the multiple countries and the United States finally calling on its citizens to be prepared to leave. We talked about the footage of Israeli tanks on the northern border, I do believe. So I think we've covered the Middle Eastern stuff. I want to quickly talk about this. I'll probably do a dedicated video on this, and I'm going to be talking to Doomberg tomorrow. If you're not familiar with Doomberg, they're a consortium of financial analysts who approach things from an energy-based point of view. So if you have any questions for Doomberg, post them in the comments section below. Believe it or not, in spite of the name Doomberg, I'm far more pessimistic, although I would say realistic, than Doomberg. So perhaps he's going to bring a bit more of an optimistic tone to the channel, at least for an hour or so. But food wars are coming, okay? Olam Agri's chief executive, Sonny Verghese, this is one of the main commodities financial analysts in the world, has said that we've fought many wars over oil, but we will fight bigger wars over food and water. And the reason why there's going to be food wars is quite interesting. He claims it's because countries are stockpiling because they're worried about potential calamity on the horizon. Okay, he argues that elevated food price inflation was in part the result of government intervention, a proliferation of non-trade barriers, and blah 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 blah. But it's also as a result of wealthier countries building up surpluses of strategic commodities. So we've seen the president of Serbia talking about how they are bolstering their supplies of all of the bare essentials in such case that war breaks out. We see this in Norway. We see the Chinese stockpiling grain. This leads to exaggerated demand and in turn higher prices. India, China, everybody has to buffer stocks. Recall India did the export ban on rice last year. So it's interesting that all of these countries are stockpiling and preparing for what? They're preparing for SHTF. So this major commodities trader, and I look forward to hearing Doomberg's thoughts about this because they tend to have a fairly level-headed view of these things and are very good at devil's advocacy. So it'll be interesting to see what they had to say. Now, Scott Ritter and friends, including Douglas McGregor, I recently stated that when Israel made the statement that they're going to be using new weapons against Hezbollah, but don't worry, they're not going to be non-conventional, as in nuclear. Well, they're claiming that not only is Israel going to use nuclear weapons and that they're going to use them actually very soon. Now, I think that the only practical use for a nuclear weapon in Israel is an electromagnetic pulse. If they use a nuclear weapon, the prevailing winds in that region, I think for the better part of the year, is north to south, meaning that it would blow into them. Now, while fallout is a temporary problem, this, of course, would not go over well with their population. They could do subterranean detonations to take out various bunker and tunnel complexes, but even that seems, I don't know if you would really have to know where the subterranean networks were, and I just don't know if that's really necessary. Maybe, obviously, you're going to be able to penetrate a lot deeper because I presume many of these bunkers are hundreds of feet below the surface, so impossible to get at even with conventional bunker busters. But I think an electromagnetic pulse would black out the Lebanese power grid and probably a good chunk of Syria and possibly other countries as well. And if it's properly placed, and the Israelis have the technology to do this, I mean, this is, they could probably do this very easily, presuming that whatever mechanism that they used to deploy it wasn't shot down. But to me, this seems like the only way that they're going to effectively bring down or utilize tactical nuclear weapons in a way which the world, number one, views as acceptable. Because, of course, if Israel comes right out the gates and uses nukes, I mean, you think you've seen protests, you ain't seen nothing yet, if that's what's going to happen. So I think if they do it, they're going to have to frame it as a new type of weapon, which is why they're saying it's not nuclear. And interestingly, there was an op-ed that was written a few months ago that referred to EMP weapons as EMP weapons, when really EMP is the residual effect of a nuclear weapon. Okay, you only get a substantial EMP from a nuclear weapon. Yes, there's dedicated EMP weapons, but they don't have enough power to really be that useful in this type of warfare. So I think that's what they're referring to. And as much as I don't agree with Scott Ritter and Douglas McGregor and that whole troop about everything, I mean, they may be onto something there. But I guess time will tell. On that note, my friends, I think I need to pack it in. I've been assiduously getting this homestead built out, and it's been a hell of a lot of work trying to be in two worlds at the same time, trying to be in YouTube land, trying to be at the warehouse to make sure the crew is all taken care of, to make sure everybody's getting their orders as soon as possible, and also trying to build out a property and then document the whole thing, because I want to share the experience with people, because, you know, I think it's important that I know now how difficult it is to do something like this. And it's very hard to find one channel that is going to explain it from start to finish simply. And I know a lot of the videos that I've been watching in which people are explaining, you know, how to do this, you know, how to build a fence, just simple things, how to fix a skid steer, you know, things like that. You know, the stuff that I'm looking for is incredibly simple, but I do also believe that it should be a little bit entertaining. So in our usual fashion, we'll try to do that. Honestly, the YouTube algorithm does not appreciate those types of videos. For some reason, it would rather just have me ranting about all the bad news. I'm not quite sure what to make of that just yet, but maybe it's just an algorithmic thing, who knows. But it's very important, my friends, that you take action, okay? That you're not just consuming bad news all day. And I know I state this all the time. Every once in a while, I have to give this spiel, but it's important because we don't want to get caught in this cycle where we're just bad news, bad news, bad news, and we're not acting on it. In fact, it's the acting on it that takes us out of that sense of despair and thinking that we can't do anything about it. And that's how I stay mentally healthy, thinking about this stuff all the time. So on that note, let's pack it in. And if you have any questions for Doomberg, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Have a good night. Canadian Prepper out.